Okay, so have you ever really stopped to think about what it would mean to be given an impossible promise? Something so out there, so unlikely that you almost can't help but laugh.
It's like that feeling of winning the lottery, but times 1,000.
Exactly. And then imagine on top of that being offered a complete do-over, a chance to wipe the slate clean, but knowing that even a moment's hesitation, a single glance back at what was, could cost you everything.
Talk about high stakes. And yet, these are the exact kind of scenarios we're diving into today as we explore Genesis chapters 18 and 19.
We're taking a deep dive into these ancient stories full of these impossible situations, tough choices, and yeah, even the chance to leave the past behind.
And what's fascinating is how these stories, written thousands of years ago, still resonate so strongly today. I mean, we might not be dealing with literal angels or cities about to be consumed by fire, but the core themes, faith, those impossible choices, the weight of our past, those are things we still wrestle with on a daily basis.
Totally. And to kick things off, we got to talk about Abraham and Sarah. And we're not just talking like, oh, they were up there in years. We're talking ancient, way past the age when most folks are ready to, take it easy.
Putting it mildly.
Right. And yet, here comes God appearing before them with this promise. Sarah, at 90 years old, is going to have a baby. 90. Can you even imagine?
It kind of boggles the mind, doesn't it?
Totally. It'd be like telling someone they're going to wake up tomorrow fluent in a language they've never even heard before.
And it's no wonder that when Sarah first heard this, she laughed. It wasn't necessarily that she didn't believe in God, but more like a, yeah, okay, in what universe kind of response. Which is where God's question comes in. Is anything too hard for the Lord? It's like he's saying, don't limit me with your human understanding of what's possible.
It really makes you think about those moments when we face our own impossible situations, That job offer that comes out of nowhere, that challenge you never thought you'd overcome. It's a reminder that sometimes we need to embrace that seeming absurdity and hold on to a sliver of hope, even when logic tells us to just laugh it off.
Absolutely. Because faith isn't always about perfect certainty or having every single detail figured out. Sometimes it's simply trusting that there's a bigger picture at play, even when we can't see it yet.
It's like taking that leap of faith, even when you're staring over the edge of a cliff, not knowing if you'll sprout wings on the way down. But hey, speaking of leaps of faith and impossible situations, our story takes a bit of a turn as we move to a very different setting. Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, those names definitely have a reputation.
To put it mildly, I mean, most folks have heard those names used to describe, well, let's just say, places of questionable morals.
Right, and it's important to clarify that this wasn't just a case of these cities being a bit too wild for their own good. We're talking about a level of wickedness, a disregard for basic human decency that was just off the charts.
It's like that saying, if the shoe fits.
Exactly. And this is where we meet Lot. He's caught in this incredibly difficult position trying to protect these angels who've come to visit while surrounded by this. Well, chaos is an understatement. And while he clearly knows the difference between right and wrong, you can just feel the way this environment is pulling at him, almost pushing him towards decisions he wouldn't normally make. It's like he's being influenced by the very corruption he's trying to avoid. And that's a really crucial point because Lot becomes this example of how even someone with good intentions can be influenced, even compromised by a toxic environment. Think about it. Have you ever found yourself acting differently, maybe even against your better judgment because of the people you were with or the place you were in?
Oh, 100%. It's like that old saying, you are the company you keep. Sometimes it's less about our own internal compass and more about these invisible pressures of our surroundings pushing us in directions we don't even realize we're going. It's kind of like, how long can asterisk you resist that pull, When do you know it's time to just cut your losses and make a clean break, even if it's scary?
Exactly. And that takes us to one of the most well-known, but also kind of disturbing parts of this whole story, Lot's wife.
The one who, looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. I'll be honest, as a kid, that always seemed a little harsh. But looking back at it now, there's definitely more to it than that, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, on the surface, it's easy to see it as just a lesson in obedience. But the emotional reality of that moment, it's way more complicated, even tragic when you think about it. This woman is fleeing a city literally being consumed by fire and brimstone, yet some part of her is still drawn back to it.
It's that feeling of wanting what's familiar, even when you no asterisk, it's not good for you.
Exactly. And that's the cautionary message that's embodied in Lot's wife's fate, I think. It's this stark warning about letting that nostalgia, that longing for what asterisk was asterisk, right? paralyze us, prevent us from moving
We've
forward.
all been there, right?
Oh, 100%. And it's not just about physically leaving a place, but really letting go of its hold on our hearts and minds. Otherwise, we risk becoming stuck, frozen in time, unable to embrace anything new.
It's a tough lesson, for sure. Speaking of tough lessons, this next part of the story, well, it's one of those moments where you read it and you're kind of like, wait, did that really just happen? And it involves Lot's daughters.
Right after they escape Sodom, they find themselves in this desolate place, just them and their father, and they're consumed by fear and uncertainty about what the future holds. And it's in this incredibly charged, deeply traumatized state that they make a decision that, well, the text doesn't shy away from.
It's definitely asterisk, not asterisk, your typical Sunday school story.
No, not at all. But as uncomfortable as it is to confront, I think there's something to be said for really leaning into these morally complex stories, these moments where human behavior is pushed to its absolute limit.
So what happens?
Well, Lot's daughters, they basically decide to get their father drunk, and let's just say they take matters into their own hands in a way that's deeply, deeply disturbing.
It kind of makes you question what happens when we feel like God isn't working fast enough, or in the way that we asterisk expect. Do we hold on to that trust, that belief in a bigger picture, or do we, like Lot's daughters, take matters into our own hands?
And do we really consider the consequences of those actions, especially when they're driven by panic or despair? Because those choices, they can have ripple effects that we might not even foresee. It's one of those things, right? Desperate times, desperate measures. But like we see with Lot's daughters, even if we can understand the why behind a choice, it doesn't erase the potential for things to go wrong. Which I guess brings us to the ultimate consequence in this whole story, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right, fire and brimstone raining down. Definitely a vivid picture. It's often seen as God's judgment on their wickedness, but isn't there also an element of mercy woven in there too?
Definitely. It's a really complex situation because while the cities ultimately face the consequences of what they've done, we also see God's compassion in the way Lot and his family are scared. And it's not like they were these shining examples of virtue themselves. I mean, Lot was clearly impacted by the very corruption that defined Sodom.
So what gives? Why spare them if it wasn't about them being, like, morally perfect?
See, that's where things get really interesting. It all comes back to Abraham. Before God even reveals his plans for Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham pleads with him, basically saying, if there are even a small number of righteous people in that city, will you spare it? And while it turns out the city doesn't meet that criteria, God still honors that promise to Abraham by rescuing Lot and his family.
So wait, it's not about their actions, it's about Abraham's faith. His prayer for them, that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Right. It shows just how powerful the faith of one person can be. Someone else's prayers, their connection to something bigger than themselves, it can literally make a difference in our lives, even if we're totally unaware of it.
Wow, it puts a whole new spin on the phrase prayer warriors, doesn't it? Makes you wonder who's out there praying for you and who you should be praying for, too. Maybe we have more of an impact on each other's lives than we realize.
Maybe so. And that's what I find so fascinating about these stories. It's this idea that we're all connected. Our choices, our beliefs, they have this ripple effect that we might not even fully grasp.
It's a lot to take in. Impossible promises, facing the unknown, the consequences of our choices. It's heavy stuff.
It really is. But what makes these stories so powerful, I think, is that they reflect our own experiences. We see ourselves in them. That struggle between faith and doubt, the courage to change, the fear of the unknown, we've all been there.
It's like looking in a mirror, seeing not just who we are right now, but who we could become. And, these stories might be full of cautionary tales, but they also offer this glimmer of hope, this reminder that we can overcome even the toughest challenges.
Absolutely. And if we can move past these simple ideas of right and wrong and really sit with the messiness, the complexities of these characters and their choices, I think there's a huge opportunity for growth because it forces us to ask ourselves how to the asterisk respond to pressure, to fear, to the unknown.
It's that age-old struggle, right? Holding on or letting go. Lot's wife, clinging to the past, well, she pays the ultimate price. But Lot and his daughters, even with all their flaws and mistakes, they're given this chance to start over. So what about us? Will we let ourselves be defined by our past? Or will we find the courage to embrace the unknown, even when it's scary? It's something to really